From the Epoch Times, or as some say, the Epoch Times, Daniel, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Look, there's been much blatant censorship by big tech in the US. Can you tell us how your publication, Epoch Times, has been targeted by big tech and the impact of this?
Absolutely. So the best way to describe it is you could say probably that over the past 5 years, the walls have been steadily closing in on big tech's restrictions and you could say censorship of the Epoch Times and our content on their platforms. So as a way of example, YouTube has demonetized all our videos as of, I think, January. Prior to that, we published a documentary talking about the Wuhan virus. And this was in the early days before there was a lot of, before the WHO could get in there and do their own investigations. And our documentary talked about, well, presented a number of facts which really supported the idea that the virus could have originated from a lab. Now, of course, we didn't make any solid assertions on this because it is, something that's not easy to verify. But that video was slapped with a false label by Facebook, by their fact checkers. So that was another instance. And one long-running issue we've had is really with the ability to advertise on Facebook and Google as well. So a lot of our posts on Facebook, we can no longer promote them or advertise them. And yeah, there's just a lot of restrictions on them overall. And this overall trend has been really happening in the last 5 years when we began reporting heavily on the Trump presidency and what's been going on there. And that's attracted a lot of attention and a lot of flack from not just big tech, but also a lot of mainstream media outlets like NBC and CNN.
What about the Epoch Times in Australia? Has it been censored also?
Yeah, so whatever happens in the US, it has a spillover effect in Australia. So essentially we can't use YouTube or Google to do any sort of marketing or advertising campaigns. Now, the importance about these channels is a lot of media and companies use Facebook and Google to really just advertise and get their products out there. That road has pretty much been cut for us, particularly on Facebook. Google, there are still some opportunities there. So we used to be able to publish little posts on Facebook and put money behind it and get it out to as many users as possible. But that road's been pretty much just been shut to us, that door. And what was interesting when you said that question was I thought back to our Chinese publications. So going back 20 years, Epoch Times or Epoch Times started as a Chinese language publication and grew steadily its influence. And we experienced a very similar situation with the Chinese. The parallels are sometimes a little bit uncanny, actually. So in the Chinese sphere, we found that we're not able to use WeChat, which is a Chinese state-sponsored social media platform. WeChat has tremendous influence in the community, in the Chinese-speaking community, and is obviously the most popular app in China. So being on that platform is essential for the growth of the media. But that door was shut to us many years ago. So the Chinese Epoch Times has had to really adapt and be quick on its feet in how it engages with readers and reaches out to people. And it really does look like the Epoch Times English edition is going through a similar process as well.
Australia has seen many examples of censorship from Twitter and Facebook, including that of politicians. In the US, it becomes big news, especially when you censor a politician. In Australia, it doesn't seem to be the furor, the excitement generated by such as, say, Craig Kelly when he was taken off Facebook, and we had an interview pulled off by YouTube. Do you think Australians, part of the nature is to think, oh well, it's so be it, it's not going to affect me, but in reality it does affect people, doesn't it?
Yes, it certainly does. I think Australia is, from our reporting and how we approach certain things, we're not at that cutting edge of what happens, like say in the US. So in the US, Donald Trump was taken off Twitter. And, can you imagine if Scott Morrison was taken off Facebook or Twitter altogether? The furor that would cause. But Australia has been relatively insulated from those sort of incidents. So that kind of leads to our population being a little bit more, how would you say, not maybe even laid back or just not as aware of these issues. And there is that Chinese saying, the frog in the boiling water, where the frog is just sitting in a kettle of water and it's been lit on fire and it's slowly boiling, but the frog just keeps, swimming along. It doesn't feel any pain. It just thinks, oh, this is rather comfortable. But by the time the water reaches boiling point, it's just too late. The frog is dead. So that's a situation we find that it's not isolated to just Australia, but a lot of countries where we're quite comfortable. We're not faced with those decisions where we really have to make a choice on what's right or what's wrong. We don't have a banning of our prime minister or our nation's top leader that the US has gone through. So that might, in some ways, lead to why our attitude towards Facebook and Google may not be as critical as in some other parts of the world.
Could last week's deal between the government, big tech and major media organisations discourage diversity of opinion?
It's an interesting question. I think there's been a lot of banter around that. I would argue a way to look at it is really that these deals being done by Google, Facebook and the major media, for the major media, they're really a short-term adrenaline boost. And why I'd say that is if you look at across like Seven West Media, News Corp, revenue overall has been stagnating or has plateaued over the last 5 to 10 years. And when we do interviews with experts in journalism, even they admit that getting payments from Google and Facebook are not going to resolve the fundamental issues with journalism or newspapers in Australia. Although it may help in the short term, it won't really save the media and address what is really the declining newsroom, declining newspapers, etc. So I think that factor is really important to look at as well. We're facing a bigger reckoning in the next few years, I think. Media outlets really will need to work out how they position themselves and how they can revive their newspapers.
How will publishers such as yourselves fare under the legislation that was passed last week?
We're investigating our options. I think a lot of the publications, you've got the big tier ones and the mid tier publications. They've managed to strike a few deals with Google and Facebook and generate a bit of income from that, which is quite positive. I think for us, we'll certainly look forward to striking a deal and being able to support more journalists. And I think there's certainly a demand amongst Australians for information that isn't towing a particular narrative or agenda. There was a survey just released by Edelman probably a week ago, and it found that close to 70% of respondents to that survey believe that mainstream media in Australia were busy pushing their own ideologies more than objective facts and reporting. So that's a pretty damning assessment. And I think about 60% believe that journalists were more focused on exaggerating facts than reporting objectively. So when you really think about it, there is this lack of trust in the media that Australians have, and there is a demand for objective journalism that isn't tainted with agendas or narratives. And so going forward, that we hope that we can get a bit of support, but also push a little bit harder in terms of objective reporting and truth-based journalism, I guess.
If somebody wants to find out more about the Epoch Times or Epoch Times, Daniel, how would they do that?
Absolutely. So readepoch.com.au is one way to look at subscribing to our paper. Otherwise, you can just visit our main website, theepochtimes.com.
Fabulous newspaper. Always read it and keep up the good work. Daniel, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike.